Hey everyone. Let me start by saying my wife and I have been together for 7 years, married for 5. We had our ups and downs, like any couple, but things were generally good until about 3 months ago. That's when I started noticing some weird stuff happening. It all began with her phone habits. She used to leave her phone lying around, no big deal. But suddenly, she was glued to it, constantly texting and disappearing into the bathroom for long stretches. I didn't think much of it at first, maybe she got a new hobby or something. But then came the nights out with friends that turned into late-night calls from an unknown number. She'd get these calls, whisper angrily into the phone, and hang up quickly. When I asked who it was, she'd snap back with excuses like, just work stuff or none of your business. Then there was this one night where she came home smelling like a different perfume. Not just any perfume, but something expensive and unfamiliar. I asked her about it, and she flipped out, accusing me of being controlling and paranoid. She said she tried it on at the mall earlier that day. It was so out of character for her to react like that. I brushed it off at the time, but looking back now, it was a huge red flag. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, you know? I love her, and I thought maybe I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't know how bad it was going to get. So, what do you think? Am I just being overly suspicious, or is there more to this than meets the eye? Alright, so after that perfume incident, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously off with Sarah. She'd been acting weird for a while now, snappy one minute, overly sweet the next. It was like walking on eggshells around her, never knowing what would set her off. One evening, I came home early from work because I wasn't feeling well. I thought maybe seeing Sarah would cheer me up. But when I walked into our bedroom, there was this eerie silence. I heard faint voices coming from the bathroom. At first, I thought it might be some weird TV show or podcast she was listening to. But as I got closer, I realized it was a conversation. And not just any conversation, it was hushed and urgent. I knocked lightly on the door. Sarah? You okay in there? No response. Just more whispers. Now, I'm not proud of what I did next, but I cracked the door open just a little. What I saw nearly made my heart stop. There she was, sitting on the edge of the bathtub, phone in hand, tears streaming down her face. She was talking to someone. A man. Please, you have to understand, she pleaded softly. I can't tell him yet. He'll lose it. I didn't need to hear any more. I quietly backed away and went back to the living room, pretending I hadn't seen anything. But inside, I was seething. Who was she talking to? Why was she crying? And most importantly, why couldn't she tell me? Later that night, after we'd both pretended nothing happened, I asked her point blank who she was talking to earlier. Her reaction was explosive. Are you spying on me now? She shrieked. You don't trust me at all. I'm not spying, I replied, trying to stay calm. But I heard you talking to someone. Who was it? She crossed her arms, glaring at me. It was my friend from the art gallery, okay? We were discussing some personal issues. Happy now? Her explanation felt thin, but I let it drop, figuring if it really was her friend, she'd tell me eventually. Fast forward to the next day. I was working late at the office when I got a text from an unknown number. Curious, I opened it. It read, "We need to talk. Can you come by the studio tomorrow around noon? L." Now, I know what you're thinking. How did I get a text meant for Sarah? Well, turns out, someone had accidentally sent it to my number instead of hers. My heart raced. Was this the same friend she was talking to on the phone? And what exactly needed to be discussed? I knew then that I had to find out more. I couldn't confront her yet, I needed solid proof. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called the local art gallery and pretended to be her husband checking on her appointment. They confirmed she had a session scheduled with Leo, a well-known artist who had been painting her portrait. The following day at noon, the pieces were starting to fall into place, but I still didn't want to believe it. Could my wife really be cheating on me with an artist who was painting her portrait? It sounded insane, but everything pointed towards it. The next day, I couldn't focus on anything. Work dragged on, and every second felt like an eternity. Finally, noon rolled around. I told my boss I wasn't feeling well and left early. I drove straight to the studio, parked across the street, and waited. At precisely 12 o'clock, Sarah's car pulled up. She got out, looking nervous, and hurried inside. I gave her a few minutes head start before going in myself. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I walked past her desk, heading towards the studio rooms. I found them quickly. The door to one of the rooms was slightly ajar, and I could hear muffled voices. I crept closer, my heart pounding in my chest. Through the crack, I saw them. Sarah and Leo. They weren't just talking. They were laughing, touching each other's hands, sharing some private joke. Suddenly, the door swung open, and Sarah stepped out, almost bumping into me. Her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, I saw guilt flash across her face. Then, just as quickly, it was replaced by anger. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed. "Me? What the hell are you doing with him?" I shot back, my voice shaking with rage. Before she could answer, Leo appeared behind her, looking equally guilty. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his tone smooth and professional, like he hadn't just been caught red-handed. "No, everything is not all right," I snapped. "Care to explain what's going on between you two?" Sarah glared at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's none of your business," she spat. "This is between me and Leo." "You're Leo?" I repeated, incredulous. "Since when do friends make house calls to their patients' bedrooms?" Her face flushed with anger. "You're blowing this out of proportion. This has nothing to do with you." "Nothing to do with me?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the hallway. "You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around behind my back, and it has nothing to do with me?" Leo stepped forward, trying to mediate. "Let's all calm down. Maybe we should discuss this somewhere else." But I was done playing nice. "No, let's discuss it right here. Right now. Tell me, Sarah, how long has this been going on?" She hesitated, her eyes darting between me and Leo. "It's complicated," she finally said, her voice trembling. "It started a few months ago. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. "A few months? That's what you call complicated? You've been cheating on me with an artist painting your portrait for months, and you think that's complicated?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't buying it. "Not anymore." "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the words felt hollow, empty. "Sorry doesn't cut it," I said coldly. "Not after everything you've put me through." Without another word, I turned and walked out of the studio, leaving her standing there with her so-called friend. As I drove home, my mind raced with thoughts of betrayal, anger, and heartbreak. How could she do this to me? How could she lie to me for so long? When I got home, I packed a bag, not sure where I was going, but knowing I couldn't stay there anymore. I needed space, time to process everything. As I left the house, I glanced back one last time, wondering if things would ever be the same again. That I drove for what felt like hours, not really knowing where I was going. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of loss. How could this have happened? We had been through so much together. Our wedding day, the countless nights spent talking about our future, the dreams we shared. And now, all of it seemed like a cruel joke. Eventually, I found myself at a small motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was somewhere to lay my head and try to make sense of everything. I checked in, got a room, and sat down on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. The reality of Sarah's betrayal hit me hard. I couldn't stop thinking about how she had lied to me, how she had made me feel like I was losing my mind with suspicion. Every little thing she had done over the past few months came back to me in vivid detail: the late-night calls, the strange perfume, the way she would disappear into the bathroom for long stretches. It all made sense now, and it hurt like hell. As the night wore on, my anger began to give way to sadness. I thought about all the things we had planned together, the life we had built. What was left of that now? Could anything be salvaged from the wreckage of our marriage? I doubted it. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. The next morning, I woke up feeling emotionally drained. I knew I needed to confront Sarah again, but I didn't know how. I couldn't face her just yet, not without some kind of plan. So, I called in sick to work and spent the day wandering around aimlessly, trying to clear my head. By the time I got home that evening, I was mentally exhausted. I walked into the house, bracing myself for whatever confrontation might come. But when I opened the door, the place was eerily quiet. No sign of Sarah. I went to our bedroom, and there, lying on the bed, was a note. My hands trembled as I picked it up and read, "Mike, I'm sorry. I know you're hurting, and I don't blame you. I've made a terrible mistake, and I can't expect you to forgive me. I've gone to stay with my sister for a while. Please take your time to think things through. I'll be waiting for your call." Her words were hollow, empty. They did nothing to ease the pain I was feeling. If anything, they made it worse. She was running away, hiding behind her sister, instead of facing the consequences of her actions. I crumpled the note in my hand and threw it across the room. Rage bubbled up inside me again. How dare she run away after what she had done? How dare she think a simple apology would fix everything? Over the next few days, I tried to go about my routine, but it was impossible. Everything reminded me of Sarah. Her clothes still hung in the closet, her favorite mug sat on the kitchen counter, and her scent lingered in every corner of the house. I couldn't escape her, no matter how hard I tried. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I received a text from Sarah. "Can we talk?" It read, "Talk?" After everything she had put me through, she wanted to talk. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to tell her to go to hell. But another part of me, the part that still loved her despite everything, couldn't help but respond. "Fine," I typed back. "But not here. Meet me at the park tomorrow afternoon." The next day, I arrived at the park early, finding a bench near the lake. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves were turning shades of orange and red. It was beautiful, but I couldn't appreciate it. My heart was too heavy. Sarah showed up a few minutes later, looking tired and worn out. She sat down beside me, but kept a distance between us, as if afraid to get too close. "I've been thinking about what to say," she began, her voice shaky. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I want you to understand why it happened." "Why it happened?" I repeated, my voice cold. "You cheated on me with an artist painting your portrait. That's pretty straightforward." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It wasn't just about him. It was about us. About how distant we've become. I felt lonely, Mike. You were always working, and when you were home, you were distracted. I needed someone who would listen to me, who would care about what I was going through." "So, you turned to Leo?" I asked, incredulous. "You couldn't talk to me?" "I tried," she exclaimed, tears welling up in her eyes. "But you were never there. You were always too busy with work or your friends. I felt like I didn't matter anymore." Her words stung, but I refused to let them soften my resolve. "That doesn't excuse what you did. You could have talked to me. Instead, you chose to lie and cheat." She wiped away her tears, looking defeated. "I know. And I'm sorry. But please, can we work on this? Can we try to fix things?" I stared at her, torn between my love for her and the pain she had caused. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give her another chance. But another part of me knew that trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to rebuild. "I don't know," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need time to think. Right now, I can't even look at you without feeling angry and betrayed." She nodded, understanding but clearly disappointed. "I get it. Just, please, don't shut me out completely. I love you, Mike. I really do." With that, she stood up and walked away, leaving me alone on the bench, staring out at the lake. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, I realized that no matter what happened next, things would never be the same between us. The days that followed were a blur of numbness and turmoil. I found myself going through the motions, doing my job, interacting with people, but feeling detached from it all. My mind was consumed by one question: what do I do now? I couldn't stop replaying Sarah's words in my head. She said she loved me. She said she wanted to fix things. But could love survive betrayal like this? Could we rebuild the trust that had been shattered into a million pieces? Every time I thought about giving her another chance, images of her with Leo flashed before my eyes, and the anger would come flooding back. One evening, I decided to take a walk around our neighborhood. It was something Sarah and I used to do together, a way to unwind after a long day. Now, walking those same streets alone felt like stepping into a ghost town. Every corner held memories of laughter, of arguments, of quiet moments shared between us. As I passed by the local cafe where we'd spent countless hours sipping coffee and talking about our dreams. I remembered how excited we were when we first bought the house, imagining all the memories we'd make there. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago, everything seemed so perfect. When I got home, I sat down on the couch, staring at the wall. I picked up my phone and started scrolling through old photos. There we were, smiling and happy at our wedding. Another picture showed us on vacation, holding hands as we strolled along the beach. It was surreal to see those images now, knowing what had happened behind the scenes. Suddenly, I received a message from an old friend, Tom. He had heard about what was going on and wanted to check in on me. We hadn't spoken in a while, but he knew Sarah and me from college days. I texted him back, telling him everything that had happened. To my surprise, he suggested we meet up for a drink later that night. At the bar, Tom listened patiently as I poured out my heart. I told him about the discovery, the confrontation, and the endless cycle of emotions I was going through. He nodded sympathetically, his expression thoughtful. "Man, I can't imagine what you're going through," he said finally. "But have you thought about counseling? Maybe seeing a therapist could help both of you work through this." Counseling? I hadn't considered that. The idea of sitting in a room, talking about my feelings and trying to salvage my marriage, seemed overwhelming. But then again, what did I have to lose? The next day, I called a marriage counselor recommended by a colleague. After explaining my situation, she agreed to see us for an initial session. I wasn't sure if Sarah would even want to go, but I figured it was worth a shot. When I told her about the appointment, she seemed hesitant at first. "Do you really think this will help?" she asked, her voice tinged with doubt. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I need to try something. I can't keep living like this, wondering what's going to happen next." Reluctantly, she agreed. The day of the appointment arrived, and we drove to the counselor's office in silence. As we sat in the waiting room, I could feel the tension between us. It was palpable, almost suffocating. When we finally went in, the counselor, Dr. Anderson, greeted us warmly and invited us to sit down. She began by asking each of us to share our side of the story. Sarah spoke first, describing how lonely and neglected she had felt. She talked about how her relationship with Leo had started innocently enough but had quickly spiraled out of control. When it was my turn, I struggled to find the right words. "I feel betrayed," I said finally. "Like everything we built together is gone. I trusted her, and she threw it away. Dr. Anderson nodded, her expression understanding. "It sounds like both of you are hurting deeply," she said. "And rebuilding trust won't be easy. But it's possible, if you're both willing to put in the work." Over the next few sessions, we delved deeper into the issues that had led to the affair. Sarah talked about her insecurities and how she had turned to Leo for comfort. I opened up about my own shortcomings, acknowledging that I had been distant and preoccupied with work. Slowly, we began to make progress. There were still moments of anger and frustration, but we were learning to communicate better, to listen to each other without judgment. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I doubted whether it was worth it. But something kept pulling me back, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could save our marriage. One evening, after a particularly tough session, Sarah and I sat on the couch, exhausted but hopeful. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her eyes filled with tears. "I never meant to hurt you like this." For the first time since everything had come crashing down, I believed her. Not because I trusted her completely, but because I saw the sincerity in her eyes, the genuine remorse she felt. "I'm sorry too," I replied softly. "I should have been more attentive, more present. I didn't realize how much you were struggling." We hugged, clinging to each other like two people lost at sea, desperate for a lifeline. It wasn't a solution, not yet. But it was a start. The road to recovery was anything but smooth. Despite the progress we made in counseling, there were days when I felt like we were taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. The trust one had once held so dear was now a fragile thing, easily shattered by even the slightest hint of suspicion. One evening, about a month into our counseling sessions, Sarah's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She was in the kitchen making dinner, and without thinking, I picked it up. It was just an email notification, but my heart still raced as I saw the sender's name, Leo. My fingers hovered over the screen, torn between curiosity and the promise I had made to myself not to snoop anymore. But old habits die hard, and before I knew it, I had opened the message. "Sarah, hope you're doing well. Just wanted to check in and see how things are going. Let me know if you need anything." I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. Why was he contacting her? Didn't he know that their relationship was over? Didn't he understand the pain he had caused? When Sarah returned from the kitchen, she saw the look on my face and immediately knew something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "An email from your artist friend," I said, my voice tight with anger. "Care to explain?" Her eyes widened in shock as she read the message. "Oh my God, Mike, it's nothing. He's just checking in. You know how artists are, they follow up with their models all the time." "Models?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're not his model anymore, Sarah. You're my wife." She put down the phone and took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "I know that. And I told him it was over between us. He's just being professional, that's all." "Professional?" I scoffed. "He was professional when he was sleeping with my wife?" Her face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. "Please, Mike, don't do this. I've cut him out of my life completely. This is the last thing I want right now." But the damage was done. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if he tried to contact her again? What if she didn't have the strength to resist him? The doubt gnawed at me, eroding the fragile trust we had been working so hard to rebuild. The next day, I confronted Sarah again. "You need to block his number and email," I said firmly. "No more contact, period." She nodded, her expression resigned. "Okay. I'll do it. But you have to believe me, Mike. There's nothing between us anymore. I love you." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But every time I thought about the affair, the lies, the betrayal, it felt like a fresh wound. How could I ever fully trust her again? As the weeks went by, the tension between us continued to simmer just beneath the surface. We made efforts to reconnect: date nights, long talks, small gestures of affection, but it always felt like we were walking on thin ice. One wrong move, and everything could come crashing down again. Then, one Saturday afternoon, we decided to visit some friends for a barbecue. It was supposed to be a fun, relaxing day, a chance to take our minds off our problems. But as soon as we arrived, I sensed something was off. Our friends, Mark and Lisa, greeted us warmly, but there was an awkwardness in the air that I couldn't quite place. As the afternoon wore on, I noticed Mark and Lisa exchanging worried glances whenever Sarah and I spoke. Finally, during a lull in the conversation, Lisa pulled me aside. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked, her voice low. We stepped away from the group, and she looked at me with concern. "Mike, I'm sorry if this is none of my business, but, has Sarah told you about what happened with Leo?" My heart sank. "What do you mean?" Lisa hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, a few weeks ago, she came to me crying. She said she had broken things off with him, but he wasn't taking it well. He kept calling and texting her, begging her to reconsider. She blocked his number, but he found other ways to reach her through mutual friends, even showing up at places she frequented." I felt a cold wave wash over me. Why didn't she tell me any of this? "I think she was afraid of upsetting you further," Lisa said gently. "But I felt like you should know. You deserve to know the truth." I thanked Lisa and rejoined the group, but my mind was reeling. Sarah hadn't told me about any of this. Why had she kept it from me? Was she still in contact with him? The questions swirled in my head, making it impossible to enjoy the rest of the afternoon. When we got home, I confronted Sarah again. "Why didn't you tell me about Leo harassing you?" I demanded. Her face paled. "How did you find out?" "Lisa told me." "So, what's going on, Sarah? Are you still talking to him?" "No," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I swear, Mike, I haven't spoken to him since I broke things off. He's been relentless, but I've blocked every way he tries to reach me. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to upset you more than I already have." I wanted to believe her, but the weight of her previous lies made it hard. "I need to see your phone," I said quietly. Reluctantly, she handed it over. I scrolled through her messages and call logs, finding nothing suspicious. Still, the fear lingered. Could I ever truly be sure? Over the next few weeks, the stress began to take its toll on both of us. Our counseling sessions became more intense, as we struggled to navigate the new challenges that arose. Every little setback felt like a mountain, every argument a reminder of the chasm that still existed between us. One night, after yet another heated discussion, Sarah sat down beside me on the bed. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It feels like no matter what I do, I can never make things right." I looked at her, seeing the exhaustion and despair in her eyes. For the first time, I realized how much this was hurting her too. Yes, she had made a terrible mistake, but she was also suffering because of it. "I don't know either," I admitted. "But I'm willing to try. For us. If you are." She nodded, wiping away her tears. "I am. I need you to believe in us again. I need to know that we can get through this." In that moment, I made a decision. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't guaranteed to work, but it was the only path forward I could see. We would keep fighting, keep trying, keep believing that maybe, just maybe, love could overcome betrayal. The weeks that followed were a delicate balancing act. Sarah and I tried to keep our fragile peace intact, each of us walking on eggshells around the other. We had made some progress in therapy, but the tension between us was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, ready to erupt at any moment. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I came home exhausted and found Sarah sitting on the couch, her eyes red from crying. My heart sank. "What's wrong?" I asked, My voice tinged with concern. She looked up at me, her face pale. "Mike, we need to talk." My stomach tightened. Those 4 words had become a harbinger of bad news ever since everything had fallen apart. "What is it?" I asked cautiously. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for what she was about to say. "I got a call today from Leo's gallery manager." My blood ran cold. "Why? What did they want?" "They said he's been admitted to the hospital," she replied, her voice trembling. He tried to take his own life." I stared at her, unable to process what I was hearing. Of all the things I expected her to say, this wasn't even close. "What do you mean, he tried to kill himself?" Sarah wiped away fresh tears. "He left a note. It mentioned me. He said he couldn't live without me." I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. This was beyond anything I could have imagined. The betrayal I had endured now seemed overshadowed by this new, horrifying development. "How did you react when they called?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I told them I had nothing to do with him anymore," she said, her eyes pleading with me to believe her. "But Mike, I'm scared. What if he tries again? What if this never ends?" I sat down beside her, trying to make sense of the chaos swirling in my head. How could one man's actions continue to wreak havoc on our lives, even after everything was supposed to be over? "We need to focus on us," I finally said, my voice firm. "We can't let him control our lives any longer. Whatever happens with him, it's not our responsibility." Sarah nodded, though I could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. "You're right. But I don't know how much more of this I can take." As the days passed, the situation with Leo continued to cast a long shadow over our lives. His attempted suicide became the subject of gossip and speculation among mutual acquaintances, and every time someone brought it up, Sarah and I cringed inwardly. It was as if the past refused to stay buried, constantly surfacing to remind us of the pain we had endured. One afternoon, Sarah received another call, this time from one of Leo's friends. They wanted to meet with her, to discuss the aftermath of his suicide attempt and ensure she was okay. She hesitated, unsure of how to handle it, but ultimately decided to go. When she returned, she looked shaken. "They showed me the note," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It was awful. He talked about how much he loved me, how he couldn't live without me. They said he's getting help now, but they're worried about him." I felt a wave of anger wash over me. How dare he put her through this? How dare he try to manipulate her emotions, even from the depths of his despair? "That's not your problem," I said firmly. "You've done everything you can. You ended things with him. You moved on. Now it's time for him to do the same." But despite my reassurances, the incident weighed heavily on both of us. It was a stark reminder of the consequences of our actions, of the ripple effects that spread far beyond the initial betrayal. Every night, Sarah tossed and turned, haunted by nightmares of what might have happened if Leo had succeeded. One evening, after another restless night, Sarah sat me down. "Mike, I think I need some space," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't keep living like this, constantly worrying about him, wondering if he'll ever leave us alone. I need to figure out how to move forward, but I can't do it here." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet," she replied, tears streaming down her face. "Maybe back to my parents' house for a while. Just somewhere where I can clear my head and try to heal." I nodded, understanding but feeling an overwhelming sense of loss. "Okay. Take all the time you need." That night, as I watched her pack her bags, I realized that this might be the end. Not just of our marriage, but of the hope I had clung to so desperately. Maybe we had reached the point where no amount of counseling or effort could save us. Maybe the scars ran too deep. When she left, the house felt emptier than ever before. I wandered from room to room, touching the remnants of our shared life, the pictures on the walls, the furniture we had picked out together, the memories etched into every corner. It was all still there, but it felt like a hollow shell, devoid of the love and warmth that had once filled it. Days turned into weeks, and I struggled to find meaning in my routine. Work became a distraction, something to occupy my mind and stave off the crushing loneliness. Friends checked in on me, offering support and advice, but none of it could fill the void Sarah had left behind. One evening, as I sat alone on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Sarah. "Mike, I miss you. I'm coming home tomorrow." My heart leapt, but it was quickly tempered by caution. Could we really start over again? Or would this just be another cycle of pain and disappointment? When she walked through the door the next day, we stood there awkwardly, unsure of what to say or do. Finally, she stepped forward and hugged me, her arms trembling around my waist. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I needed time to think, to figure out what I wanted. And I realized that I want to fight for us. I want to make this work." I held her tightly, feeling a glimmer of hope flicker within me. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to rebuild our shattered world. But the road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and unknowns. The first few days after Sarah's return were tentative, like we were both testing the waters to see if this fragile peace would hold. We talked more openly than we had in months, sharing our fears and hopes for the future. It felt like a fresh start, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved, lurking just beneath the surface. One evening, as we sat on the couch together, Sarah turned to me with a serious expression. "Mike, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice steady but filled with apprehension. My heart sank. Here it comes, I thought. Another bombshell. "What is it?" I asked cautiously. She took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving mine. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, and I think we need to make a clean break from Leo once and for all." I nodded, relieved that it wasn't something worse. "I agree. How do we do that?" "I want to send him a letter," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "A final goodbye, telling him that we're done, that he needs to move on with his life and leave us alone." The idea made sense, but part of me recoiled at the thought of re-engaging with him in any way, even indirectly. "Are you sure that's a good idea? What if it makes things worse?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I can't keep living in fear, wondering if he'll try to reach out again. This needs to be a definitive end." Reluctantly, I agreed. If it brought her some closure and peace, then maybe it was worth the risk. Over the next few days, Sarah worked on the letter, pouring her heart into every word. She showed it to me when she was done, and I read it silently, my chest tightening as I processed her words. "Dear Leo, I hope this message finds you well. I have been reflecting deeply on everything that has transpired between us, and I feel compelled to write this final letter to bring an end to our connection. Our relationship was a mistake, one that caused immense pain and suffering for everyone involved. Mike and I are working hard to rebuild our marriage, and we need to focus on healing without the specter of our past hanging over us. Please understand that I will always wish you well, but our chapter is closed. I urge you to seek the help you need and find peace in your own life. Let us both move forward. Sincerely, Sarah." It was heartfelt and sincere, but also firm. I could see how much it meant to her to finally put an end to this chapter of her life. A few days later, Sarah sent the letter, and we waited anxiously for any response. Days passed, and nothing happened. No calls, no messages, no further attempts to reach out. For the first time in what felt like forever, we experienced a brief respite from the constant tension and anxiety. But just as we began to breathe easier, fate dealt us another cruel twist. One afternoon, while Sarah was out running errands, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a familiar voice came through the line. "Leo." "Mike, it's me," he said, his voice low and strained. "I got Sarah's letter. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. My blood ran cold. Why was he calling me? What did he expect me to say? Thanks, I replied curtly. But it's over. You need to let us go. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I know, he said finally. But I just needed to hear your voice, to know that you're okay. That Sarah's okay. Why now? I demanded, my patience wearing thin. Why, after everything you've done, why are you suddenly concerned about our well-being? Another pause. Because I realize now how much damage I've caused. I was selfish, blinded by my own feelings. But I'm trying to get better. I'm seeing a therapist, taking medication. I needed to reach out one last time. His words struck a chord, but they didn't change anything. The pain and betrayal were still too raw. That's great for you, I said coldly. But we don't need your apologies or your concern anymore. Just leave us alone. Before he could respond, I hung up the phone, my hands shaking with anger and frustration. How dare he try to insert himself back into our lives, even now, when Sarah returned home, I told her about the call. Her face paled, and she looked like she might cry. He called you? After everything? Yeah, I said, my voice tight. But I told him it's over. He needs to stay away. For the rest of the day, Sarah was withdrawn, lost in her own thoughts. I could see the weight of the situation bearing down on her, threatening to undo all the progress we had made. That night, as we lay in bed, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. Mike, I'm so scared, she whispered. What if he tries again? What if he never leaves us alone? I pulled her close, holding her tightly. We can't control what he does, I said softly. All we can do is focus on us, on rebuilding our trust and our love. We've come this far, and we're not giving up now. In the days that followed, we tried to put the incident behind us, but it lingered like a dark cloud. Every time the phone rang, every time someone knocked on the door, we braced ourselves for another confrontation. The fear of Leo's shadow loomed large, threatening to unravel everything we had fought so hard to save. Then, one evening, we received a package in the mail. It was addressed to Sarah, and inside was a small, unmarked envelope. My heart raced as she opened it, fearing the worst. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. Sarah unfolded it and read the words aloud. Sarah, Mike, I've taken your advice. I've sought help, and I'm committed to getting better. I understand now the depth of the harm I've caused, and I am truly sorry. I won't contact you again. Please live your lives in peace. With deepest regrets, Leo. We sat in stunned silence, the weight of his words sinking in. It was over. Really over. There were no more loose ends, no more threats hanging over our heads. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, we could breathe freely. As the days turned into weeks, the anxiety slowly began to fade. We focused on rebuilding our relationship, rediscovering the love and connection that had once bound us together. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt and uncertainty, but we faced them together, stronger than before. Looking back, I realized that the journey we had endured had changed us both. We had faced our darkest fears, confronted our deepest insecurities, and emerged on the other side, scarred but wiser. The road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, but we were ready to face them. Hand in hand, months passed, and life slowly began to feel normal again. The constant fear and anxiety that had once consumed us started to fade, replaced by a cautious optimism. Sarah and I continued our counseling sessions, working through the lingering issues and rebuilding our trust brick by brick. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sarah turned to me with a soft smile. Do you remember when we first bought this house? She asked, her voice tinged with nostalgia. I nodded, remembering those early days filled with hope and dreams. Yeah. We thought it was perfect. It still is, she said, reaching for my hand. It's just different now. Stronger, maybe. I squeezed her hand, feeling a warmth spread through me. We've been through hell and back, but we made it. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I'm proud of us. Proud of how far we've come. As we sat there in comfortable silence, I realized something important. Life would never be the same as it was before the betrayal. There would always be scars, reminders of the pain we endured. But those scars didn't have to define us. They could serve as a testament to our resilience, to the love that had survived even the darkest times. The road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, but we were ready to face them together. We had learned the hard way that trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. That love, while powerful, isn't invincible. It requires work, patience, and understanding, but most importantly, we had learned that forgiveness both of others and ourselves is possible, even after the deepest betrayals, and so, we did. One step at a time, hand in hand, into whatever the future held.